and welcome back to Week in Review with the one and only Doooovid. We'll be transitioning straight into our song for the day because Doooovid has stepped away from the computer for just a moment. We'll be back with you in less than 2 minutes. Hello and welcome back to Week in Review. Thank you so much for joining us today, Doooovid and audience. Looking forward to a great show and lots of fun learning. I'll hand it over to you, Doooovid, for the intro.
Oh, thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, good to be back. Let's open up with Acne Dave. He's a pretty famous Hare Krishna Prabhupada disciple, traveling sannyasi, preacher, kirtan leader. Used to have a vegetarian restaurant in Brooklyn that was also pretty popular. And that's when he came to Detroit. He led a nice kirtan. Got that on my YouTube channel. Didn't feel like chanting, so I thought I'd just play that. Just good time, spiritual moment. Agni Dave was one of the people that he spoke at University of Michigan and kind of went through his conversion story to Hinduism in this case. And it starts, he was orphaned, I think as a young teenager. And I think it was like Barbados or one of the Caribbean islands that he was from. And that's when he started believing in reincarnation. He had the realization at his, God forbid, his father's funeral that his father was not, the body. It was probably a Catholic open casket funeral of some sort. Later he came across the Bhagavad Gita, and then later he met Prabhupada and became a disciple till today, where he travels around talking about that. But he is an interesting man. So I thought it'd open up, set the tone with a good chat. Got spiritual moms there, God forbid. Not much happening. My area, COVID-19's flaring up, and even, God forbid, I'm in like partial quarantine. I was at an event, family, and they got, came down possibly COVID-19. But for me, that's relatively easy for me to quarantine. So we should probably talk about COVID-19. It's hitting, it's flaring back up. It's probably going to get substantially worse, and people are probably not going to know what to do. So we should probably talk more about it, maybe even dedicate a full stream to it. I looks like I'm going to be regular with Charles Moskowitz on his channel Thursdays, and we're having interesting conversations. And with the elections, he's been getting pretty good guests. So I was on Thursday at 1:00, and he on at noon he had Sheriff Joe Arpaio. That was his guest. He was came out with a new book, and then I came on, and we even talked about immigration, debated a little bit about leftists versus rightist Jews and multiculturalism and various things. Luke Ford, I still not really. I think he sent me a link on my Gmail, which I don't check regularly. So it could be one night this week Luke had actually sent me the link, but I missed it. But it's unlikely I'm going to stream with him till after elections. Deshaun here in my area, we're going to look for a way to do a stream. I mean, I'll probably just have him in my house, and we'll have to assume he's tested negative or it's safe for COVID-19 reasons, because we are in an uptick right now in this area. But probably we'll wait to after elections, because if we stream now, it would just be a bunch of predictions about what's going to happen. So rather than do that, we'll just give analysis after the election. A lot of research, because I spend most of the day just at home reading. I'm trying to play less chess. I've been playing a lot of chess, and I think I'm going to take a break from chess. It had been useful for a little bit of my research on decision making, but it's probably stretched the limit of its use. So, but my research is really moving forward. I started rewatching my public study sessions, that I'd made from the first JF debate, and going over that information. And I feel pretty confident now that I'm basically up to date on the most current research on consciousness, the major research. Obviously, there's thousands of papers being published every month related to the subject, but the major papers, the names and ideas of the type of the people who appear at Hamarov's conference, and the more even the anesthesiological, medical stuff, the chess studies, and hopefully that means I'll be able to start pushing forward the multiple truth hypothesis and my own ideas, where I'll be able to properly frame it within the current state of human knowledge. So for that, I guess I'll hand it over to Jennifer.
Right on. That's great to hear. Yeah, so I've got a got a mask here, but it's like a face thing, so you can still see your whole face. It's just like, you know, I think it's less tacky than the face mask, because I just like tried putting a face mask on to go outside. I was super uncomfortable, but I find these ones are a bit better. So like if I had a huge hat, it might not be so obvious. Anyway, that's my comment on the COVID for now. And yeah, I got an article out as well as a PDF out. So I'm since the last episode, so I'm really happy about that. We could look at that a bit later on. I don't know if you want to hop into those Penrose clips. David had me make a couple clips from the Dr. Penrose recent chat that happened during the is the Science Consciousness Conference, yes? And so we have those ready to go if you want to start with that, or
Yeah, we can do that. And unfortunately, I was basically exactly correct in my prediction that, like, they would take like over a month. I mean, because they always do that way. They could have live streamed it and had like everyone there who wanted to see it live and in the chat, but instead they had like paid. You still had to pay for it, and it was on Zoom. So finally this week they released Professor Roger Penrose talk, and Hamarov asked some questions at the end, and it's basically an update on the latest evidence for the orchestrated reduction, and pretty interesting. I guess he's getting the Nobel Prize for other things, but from my venue point, like, this is the more interesting research that's being done, and what anything, if it raises the status of Penrose, maybe it'll raise the status of research on this issue in general. But yeah, sure, if you want to jump right in and play some clips out of that, and recommend anyone interested in the subject to watch the whole thing, and hopefully they'll eventually release all of those videos, but who knows.
all right, so I'll get the clips. They're not very long. They were just little bits that I thought were relevant. I don't really I didn't think it was a particularly good explanation. I don't know about you, but there was a lot of rabbit holes, it seemed, and not really a grand unifying narrative to the chat. So,
namely, this is one of the things that came about from my worrying about, well, in the lockdown, trying to worry about the reduction of the state. There really are two kinds of reality. And this didn't occur to me for quite a long time. The reality here is what we're going to call quantum reality. And I'm calling this Einstein's dictum. If you can, well, let me say the two kinds of reality. In classical reality, you can ask the state of a system, what is your state? And it can say, my state is X. You can go and explore it and measure it and all sorts of things. And yes, you can find out what it is. You can find out what its state is. You don't tell it, you don't put to it what its state might be. You say, what is your state? And it says, my state is X. That's classical reality. Many experiments are of that nature. Quantum reality is the Einstein dictum thing. You can't ask what its state is. But what you can do is you can make a little calculation. You think, oh, I think the state by now ought to be X. And then you say, can you confirm whether your state is X? And it says, yes, with certainty. You can repeat the same experiment many, many times. Every time it will come out with the answer yes. So Einstein says this is a real thing. But the point I'm trying to make, it's a different kind of reality. And I think this is an important point. Now, I want now to say a little bit about the classical reality here. Let me consider a situation, let me not take that away for the moment. I'm going to consider, many of my diagrams will be space-time diagrams. This is a space-time diagram. Time is going up the picture. Now I'm considering a lump here, and you're hitting it with a beam split photon. So it's not the cat, which could be dead or alive. If I can find that again. But what it does is if the photon goes one way, it gives the object a little push. If it goes, is that the cat? No, I'm looking at the one. I'm afraid I have to apologize.
all right. So that was a bit of an explanation there about reality versus quantum reality. But what is reality? I know it seems like a frustrating question, but if you don't define your criteria explicitly, how do you know if it's real or not? So this is, again, this often encountered problem is that people are just not defining their axioms, because it's actually not that easy to do that, because you have to really stand by an axiom. The axiom is the soil upon which the trees of arguments grow. So the soil is determinative of the quality of plants that will grow in it. So if you pick the wrong axioms, you're never going to get the right answer. And I noticed that their axioms on their orchestrated reduction hypothesis, I mean, I think they believe that the waveform is reduced through the gravity force. And that's absurd as an axiom, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean,
Because
definitely.
gravity is like basically almost the same everywhere. Like gravity is the most minimal force that we experience.
Yeah, I really think it's going to need the multiple truth hypothesis, some method of truth discovery to frame this, because you were saying like that any of these descriptions, even mathematical descriptions of reality, are only partially true and partially descriptive. So you need a method that's going to try to piece together these partial descriptions.
How about this question? Okay, I just thought of one. Where is the information in the consciousness stored?
Well, I'm still saying that dualism at the end of the day, saying that no, I mean, Penrose Hameroff quantum mind is not going to be able to answer the hard problem of consciousness, and you're still going to have to come on to a spiritual realm to explain the phenomenon.
Is that really an explanation, though, to just say God did it? I mean, I don't see people going for that.
Well, no, I'm saying that is the factual explanation, that consciousness does not derive from the material realm. that's the explanation given in the scripture that's been explained to us by the sages. Although there's
And what is
dispute
the
amongst,
material realm?
well, I mean, there's the measurement limit of what's knowable to us beings dwelling in the material realm, and then there's the wisdom that's been given over that explains to us things that are beyond our ability to decipher by measurement. And then, there's also the introspection, the power of introspection, and what is the power to decipher the truth by either pure reason or through some sort of it's called introspection. But if there's a spiritual realm, or the source of the soul is could attach on to some larger power supply, that's largely how the sages explain the phenomenon. So that's what I'm
Did you say power supply? So like the power supply for the soul, the fuel for the soul is coming from the spiritual realm? Awesome. Yeah, just want to be clear that I knew what you were saying on that one. Okay.
That's pretty given in the classics, not just in Judaism. It's almost a prerequisite. Like
my religionist says something very similar, so I don't want to say I get it, but I can.
In the Vedas, what I'm saying, it's almost universal in the ancient dualistic systems, and I don't think that quantum mind or orchestrated reduction is going to change the fact. In fact, it's going to have no influence, although it might demonstrate an observation of the phenomenon, like something is causing this and it's not derived from the material realm. And we're still going to have to go with the wisdom of the sages. Like, there's nothing from the Penrose hammer of hypothesis that's going to change the fact that we need to rely on the received wisdom of the sages.
Oh yeah, I mean, ultimately these questions of meaning, I don't want to say they only have answers in religion, but the source of those answers, if you dig back deep enough, you're going to find religious answers. So Scott Ferguson asks,
I'm saying it's pure consciousness. Just the question of what is this voice in my head? What is this that drives me? That there will never be a material answer to that question. And even if we understand the mechanisms of quantum mind perfectly 100%, that Doooovid is saying that it's not going to help answer those questions.
Scott Ferguson would like to know what is the oldest Hebrew notion of Azazel? Excuse me, I don't know how to say this word. Wilderness scapegoat.
I mean, it's like a Christopher Ben Jerkness, Adam Green question. I mean, Azazel's the scapegoat that's commanded by God to be offered on the Day of Atonement. It's first mentioned in, I think, Leviticus. So, I mean, after the Jews have left Egypt and are wandering in the desert, we're started to give the law of what it's going to be like when we get to Israel. So presumably the 40 years wandering in the desert, maybe I think maybe it's possible they performed this ceremony, or it didn't get performed till they entered Israel. I think it was performed immediately, actually. So that's just received wisdom. God commanded it immediately upon leaving Egypt, and it's been being done ever since, except after the temple was destroyed. So it hasn't been done for the last 2,000 years.
Yeah, well, even when my quantum mind hypothesis gets accepted by the mainstream, because everyone knows that I'm right and everyone else is wrong, I'm still going to say that the knowledge I got to do this theory comes from religion. So it's going to come back to religion one way or the other, unless somehow JF's theory becomes the dominant one.
Well, if you advance a better understanding of the material realm and the understanding of the mechanics of at least, say the application of consciousness or the interface of consciousness to the biological realm, that could be measured, so to say, that even if you can't trace the origins of the quantum effects, you say that these quantum effects are involved in so to say, the enlivenment of the body, and maybe you could even explain that perfectly. beyond what's happening in the spiritual realm that causes these effects, or to be manifested in the way, or the magnetic realms, and possibly even reincarnation. That it's possible that it could explain even a large fraction of the mechanism of reincarnation, even though a large part of reincarnation can't be explained by quantum mind, because there's going to be some dualistic spiritual element to the soul that isn't affected.
People could try to invoke that, but then I can just say, nope, sorry, that doesn't pass the scientific test, and chuck it out with the garbage, can't I?
Well, I mean, that's what, even with quantum mind, Hamarov was recognizing that it's pretty difficult to propose as a scientific theory and make falsifiable. So I'm not saying that we're not going to come to advancements on dualism.
Well, the idea of falsifiability is largely a misconstruction of something Karl Popper said, who wasn't even a scientist. So science, what's important is replicability and testability, right? Not falsifiability. I mean, you can't falsify gravity. People think falsifiable means able to be proven false, but within this context, what it means is able to be tested. I don't really get why this falsifiability thing is such a big deal. Well, yeah, I do. It's not rational. Quebecois says JF observed current developments. It's not a theory; it's happening. Yeah, okay. To believe in JS theories is actually a bigger leap of faith than to believe in my theory. You're saying you trust this person to interpret what happened 4 billion years ago, and it hasn't happened since. So, and we can't replicate it. That's the thing. Like his theory is non-replicable because we are unable to replicate DNA-based replicators. So unless something has changed within the Earth itself that would preclude RNA-based replicators where it hadn't precluded them before. And again, you don't have an answer for this outside of quantum mind. So I just don't see that as a viable theory at all. And just the fact that people in science can't disprove it doesn't mean that it's right. It just means they don't really understand biology much, because the only theory they really have to go on is natural selection via random mutation, which doesn't really give any insight into what's actually happening, because life is highly ordered. It isn't random. That's what distinguishes life from non-life, is the ordering. And if you want to see evidence of ordering, if you're not convinced on that, just look at the symmetry in the human body. That's a form of order. Symmetry is a form of order. So yeah, I did upload a new PowerPoint to my School of Entropy website. So if people want to check that out, there's a bunch of slides and PDFs. It's a really great resource, especially if you're looking at educating yourself or homeschooling even. So if you're looking to do that, I can help you get started. This is more advanced. Like, it's definitely high school plus level math and physics, but you can learn it much faster. And you just need to get, a good basis of understanding and a few mathematical ideas. So I have uploaded the 3 realms to my School of Entropy website. If anyone wants to check that out, I'll put the link in the description in just a second, or in the chat, sorry. And yeah, did you want me to quickly run through this slideshow?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Did you get a chance to look at it? It's okay if the answer is no. I understand. It's
no. In fact, I didn't. I meant to look at it, and I opened the page a few times, and I never did. I'm sorry.
No, don't worry about it. It's like, I actually wanted to talk to you face to face about this because I think it sort of resonates with your theological interpretations of things. So yeah, this is basically about the 3 realms. I spent a lot of time on this. It's really hard to get the idea across. So hopefully this is clear to people. So we're looking at 3 realms, and we're living in the observable realm. To us, the directly observable realm is called the gross, the most gross. It doesn't mean like yucky gross. It's the opposite of subtle. So I don't exactly know how to translate these words, Doooovid. Do you think you can try to tell the audience what subtle versus gross means? I'm sort of struggling for context.
Well, I mean, like the subtle body versus the gross body in terms of the soul.
No, I'm just talking. Yes, that is what it applies to, but I'm talking about the words themselves. Like, how would we describe these words to a Western audience?
Well, I mean, subtle in use, it's something like softly spoken or behind the surface, like a subtle hint to a person, if the person's not streaming properly, you could subtly hint to the person in a low key way that maybe only they see, and in a spiritual realm that could refer, or physical realm that could refer to powers of the body or powers of the soul, versus gross, which in economic terms, gross is the total, like the gross income. That means before expenses, all the money you got in, as opposed to the net after you've taken out the expenses. Or gross could mean in a negative way, just like overabundance. So the gross body is just the materialistic nature, sometimes specifically related to the animalistic functions of the body, like reproduction and eating and using the restroom type activities, but could also just mean the crude form of human behavior, like the subtle, the more refined aspects, versus gross, the unrefined, unworked on, materialistic, negative nature that people are without refinement likely to display.
Thanks for that explanation there. Yeah, so to just sort of like understand that gross versus subtle doesn't mean the exact same thing as it. Maybe it doesn't have a perfect translation, but for example, if we were going to look at the elements of Aristotle, we have ether, wind, water, fire, and earth. And if you were to rank those in order of most subtle to most gross, because it's a spectrum, and these are two ends of the spectrum, you'd be going most subtle is ether, then air, then fire, then water, then earth, right? So it's more compacted. So we don't really have an analog for this, but the closest I could think that really explains it is the kosha system. And within this framework, the quantum mind is axiomatic, but it's implicit. It's not explicitly stated. There are different axioms because it was revealed subjectively versus quantum mind, which is an objective thing. So the way that they look at it is that there are layers to the mind body, and they're ranked in order of subtle. So the least subtle level of the mind body is the food level, which is the body itself. And then you have the energy level, which is what animates the body. And then you have three more subtle levels all the way down to this like inner mind, non dual. We won't go into that too much, but just wanted to make the point that there are realms and we have to distinguish them by order of subtleness. So we have the directly observable realm, which is the least subtle, then the indirectly observable realm, and then the unobservable realm. Now, why would we care about the unobservable realm? Well, because objects within the unobservable realm inform the behavior of indirectly and directly observable entities. For example, the perfect sphere. I've been over this before. I won't do the whole rant, but it's impossible to observe a perfect sphere. But it's still, that shape is still very important because it's ultimately dictating how the indirectly observable realm works, which is then turns around and dictating what the directly observable realm looks like. So in the pure form realm, you're basically just talking about unobservable archetypes. So sphere, square, cube, excuse me, anything that's like a perfect shape. And you can even have more complex pure forms. So an example of a more complex pure form could be your Myers-Briggs archetypes. There's no such thing as a 100% pure, Myers-Briggs archetype, but people are, relatively close to one, or you can get close to one, but you can't quite reach it. So this idea of the pure form realm being static and the observable realms being vibrational. Everything that we can observe has a vibrational nature to it, whereas the pure form realm doesn't. A sphere is a sphere is a sphere, it's nothing changing. Whereas in our observable realms, we don't ever observe perfect spheres. We observe objects that are very close to a sphere and can be said to oscillate about the spherical shape, approaching it convergingly from all directions, but never truly remaining in that point because the nature of the observable universe is vibrating, not static. All right, so I didn't read what was all on this. I don't want to spend too much time. I go into waveform reduction, and that is explaining why. So observation is waveform reduction. Things tend towards a spherical shape because that's the maximum entropy shape. Therefore, anything observed is going to be necessarily deviated from a spherical shape. Puriform realm is static, so I've already been into this. So I've got an example here of how you can derive a cube and associated squares and lines from spheres. So you could say, well, there's two pure forms there. There's a cube and a sphere. But then you can say, oh, actually, well, the cube is linearly dependent or dependent because it's not really linear, but we can construct a cube from spheres, right? So is it really different? Well, again, this comes down to a difference of axioms. Where you end up, always it depends on where you start. But we can see here an example of a scanning tunneling microscope with salt crystals, and they're pretty awesome. But as you can see, they're not perfect cubes. But we can see that it's a perfect cube that is telling these molecules how to arrange themselves. And that's a really important distinction. The pure form realm is ubiquitous, but its effects only become observable when energy becomes localized. So if the sun were anywhere else in the universe, it would still be the same behavior. It would be exhibiting the same behavior locally. So the reason that there's gravity is because the sun's localized where it is and we're here. But if we were elsewhere, it would still be the same essential shape, archetype, cookie cutter, whatever you want to call it, dictating the underlying material. Here's another example. So you start with a sphere, that's the pure form, then you go into the unobservable realm. So this shape here is indirectly observable. Maybe it'll even one day be directly observable, but for now it's indirectly observable, but it's inferred starting from a sphere and then realizing, oh, well, it's not just going to be a pure sphere because that shape would cause all the energy to go towards the extremities due to entropic expansion, which would cause our bodies to explode, which would cause us to die. And so this energy has to be recirculated in such a way that it minimizes the probability of a electrical discharge. That's your law of electricity. All right, so I've got a toroidal puriform. This one's interesting because it keeps coming up over and over. People are always interested in this one. I guess you could think of it as one of the harmonics of the sphere. So when the sphere gets too much energy to just be a pure sphere, it's eventually going to fold itself so that the energy is more dispersed. Because again, this is just entropy. Energy is always going to be trying to disperse to the lowest possible level. And then we have the material realm. We already know what this one is. This is the one we're interacting through. All right, so we've got this multiplicity of microstates. So we ask ourselves, we go back to pure form realm, could we derive every archetype from just a sphere? Well, maybe we could derive all the geometric archetypes from just a sphere. Probably not the more complex archetypes like doshas or Myers-Briggs or things like that, but there's less pure form, there's less unique, i.e. independent archetypes within the pure form realm. And as you go gradually down to the less subtle / more gross realm, you get a multiplicity of microstates, and you can see the difference between the indirectly observable realm, which has 118 microstates, versus just out of the distinct species on Earth, they've got calculated 8.7 million. So you can see there's like exponential multiplicity in the number of states. Now, are these states independent of the underlying array? Well, no, because all life on Earth is comprised of some combo of those 118 elements. But we see this unfolding of multiple niches that indicate the gross realm has many more variations to it, or apparent variations, than the subtle realm. And that's why part of the reason why they say it's like an illusory realm, because it's like, well, it seems like they're different, but actually they're all really comprised of the same basic ingredients. So in summary, geometry of observable shapes is determined by the associated photonic field, which is itself determined by the associated pure form. All reasoning pertaining to pure forms begins with the sphere's fundamental waveform, and harmonics of this waveform are then deduced by our structural and energetic attributes. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that was not too dull for people. And happy if there's any questions in the audience. Back over to you, Doowovid.
Bravo, bravo. Awesome. Good work.
Oh, thanks. I mean, I guess I'm trying to make a religious concept undeniable to a secular audience. So I hope it doesn't seem like I'm being too much of an atheist or secularist to you.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that framing of yours. I mean, I agreed with your presentation more, but I mean, the way you frame it, insane people don't necessarily make their decision based on logic. There's nothing you could do to necessarily change the way people are going to perceive the patterns based on the evidence. You might provide some evidence or persuasion, but it's ultimately going to depend on the person's karma and the sum total of their sense perception that includes the information that you gave them. So I wouldn't look
So
at
I'm
the
very
process.
appreciative that your karma is high enough that you can understand what I'm saying. Zeno of Elia wants to know if this is like Plato's forms. Yeah, it's very likely Plato was using some type of low cardinality elemental system. I think he had 5 elements and they were associated with geometries. So if you look through the different examples of people using natural numerology like this, you'll see that they have slightly different interpretations on things, but they don't differ from each other in the sense that they all agree about causality and they all agree that the universe is comprised only of those elements. So it may seem like a regressive way to look at things because we know better now, but back then that's really the best that they had. And it actually does work quite well to use a low cardinality elemental system because we only have the ability to distinguish so many different complex microstates. So 118 elements is just going to be too much for us to meaningfully discern. So we do need to bring it down to some low cardinality elemental set, but these Platonic type ones won't be accepted in the modern day because we know already that there are more than 5 literal elements. We know exactly how many elements there are. So we'd need to look at the elements as being the proton, neutron, electron, photon in order to be able to use that type of approach that Plato would have used, and more importantly, Pythagoras before him, to sort of see the real parallels there.
Yeah, so I would see it, in terms of proving the theory, that will be done by creating a mathematical model that creates predictions that could be tested by third-party sources. So, that our models are both becoming closer and closer to that point from somewhat sort of like objective, the academy, where, obviously very few members of the masses are members of the academy. But, the ultimate truth will have to be submitted in scientific form and will have to, win over. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to win over, but should make predictions that anyone in the academy who understands it will be able to test. But then there's also, so the cult behind the movement, the psychological phenomenon, what people understand. It's like the theory of relativity. What does it matter to your average person? And you say, well, like nothing. But it's like, no, it matters to people because they understand it on their own level, and that changes how they perceive the world, even if they're not a scientist. So it's like multiple truth hypothesis. If you give a bunch of mathematical language and like truth discovery and Schrodinger's equation, but just on a personal level, the understanding of the scientific theory is like a social theory, is a psychology heuristic, where it's okay, the person may not be able to understand the mathematics or computer programming to make predictions, but they could see a practical purpose in their own use in terms of like cognitive dissonance and predicting, understanding our own minds, understanding the minds of others, understanding complex systems. So I think your presentations are hitting that also, where it's understandable. It's beneficial at multiple levels. Like you're saying that if there were little kids in the audience, the little kids would also improve their thought process and understand elements of it that were like, oh, simple. Now, I could make my processes more efficient.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I tried to do that also in my article. I don't know if you've seen that one yet, but I talked a little bit about denial because I found this really awesome video where someone had simulated in the linear system, which is the one we're familiar with. But as you start to move away from it, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and eventually inverts itself across the back of the lattice. So I don't know if people could see that. Yeah, I think it's actually rendering pretty good on the OBS there. So in a spherical coordinate system, you have this limitation where you're kind of constrained to a spherical shape difference. So I use that as a metaphor for denial. Denying something actually makes it bigger and inverted in your mind, which is how denial then leads to projection, because essentially we are attributing cognitive dissonance, because everything is ultimately about minimizing cognitive dissonance with the imperatives of consciousness. And those are I am safe, and I am worthy. So the most important one is the I am. That's like the central node. It's in the middle. The other two are on top of it. And then I talk a little bit about sleep. And I generated this diagram because I think my did you say you saw this article yet, Doooovid? I'm not sure because I didn't put it out that long ago, but basically trying to do a drawing here of the energetic distribution. This is not the total energy of the mind. This is the energetic maximum, right? The mind is something that the total consciousness envelops the entire body. And we're just looking at a subset of it, namely that's whatever's going on around the cranium. So the idea is that sleeping shifts this energy into the adjacent state, which is something like a donut going around the head. So to just visualize that shape while you're trying to sleep will actually help you fall asleep. You can try it yourself, works really well. And then there's some talk about how to help yourself fall asleep if you have trouble sleeping, as well as how to achieve lucid dreaming better. So there are some predictions of my theory. It gives predictions that are testable, and I welcome people to test them because I hate to think that people are suffering from not being able to fall asleep. And there's some very easy tricks you can do. So I'll just put that link in the chat for anybody who wants to check it out. It looks like John Vance is wanting to come on the show, Doooovid. I think he's been banned permanently for his drunken, horrible, disgusting, insulting behavior, unless you really want to talk to him. Are you there, Doooovid? I think you're still muted.
Yeah, sorry. Just yeah, I don't. I'm a pretty forgiving guy. Like, I don't mind if you want to try him out. Like, but it doesn't bother me either way. I haven't spoken to him in a while.
Well, we'll see if he has something to actually say, because I don't really think he has anything to say. I think he just wants to come on and yell at me because I cause so much cognitive dissonance that he turns into a beast in my presence, which sadly, as we all know, is not unprecedented. Yeah, so that's about it. I hope people enjoy the writing, and happy to answer any questions if anybody has them. So would you like me to play the other clip from Dr. Penrose?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
All right, it's not very long, so hopefully that'll go well.
Actual consciousness takes place. It has to be orchestrated in some way, which is a much more subtle problem, I'm sure, to give something which is, we could call genuine, something that can really feel something in a genuine sense. But in a certain sense, it's the or choice which maybe gives us scope for free will. I've never been quite sure what I thought about free will. Certainly the view is that if you have a deterministic universe like Newtonian picture, or when you introduce Maxwell's equations, it's still deterministic. If you introduce Maxwell's demons even, it's still deterministic. If you introduce the quantum wave function, you introduce the Schrodinger equation, it's still deterministic. It's not deterministic or something when you have this reduction of the state, and maybe that's where one's consciousness actually does come in and makes a decision which goes back in time in some sense. Now,
yeah, so that wasn't very long there. Just thought that one might be interesting for people to see how they're interpreting the space-time event, because it looks like they don't really even have a hypothesis for where consciousness is really happening or how. They're just saying maybe if there's a quantum uncertainty, effect, this could be where you could establish some type of a free will concept. You're still muted, Doooovid. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done advancing these hypotheses still. So I mean, they're still relatively at the beginning stages.
Yeah. Someone's just asking for the link. I'll go grab it and put it in the chat there. So John Vance wants to come on and talk about the Quran and the Old Testament. It's not really the place for that, John. You have your own channel that you can talk about those things on. We've already had those conversations many times, and you know full well that I'm not going to change my mind on any of this stuff.
So maybe I'll go into screen share and just show a few things I found interesting this week.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll make your image bigger there.
Okay, so anyway, if anyone's heard of the Fields Institute, they have a lot of good videos. I'll put it in the chat. And just interesting mathematical explanations. This was like a learning dynamical systems using local stability priors, and it seemed like interesting mathematics towards what I've mentioned. These fields like sinks in sources and vector fields, like a possible way to visualize or invent equations that would be usable for different purposes. But if anyone likes mathematics, it's a good page, and you got some of the latest discoveries in mathematics, or just great minds going over different ideas. Did you want to comment on that, or you just want me to keep going?
You can go ahead. I'm just grabbing a link for someone.
Okay, so here was something interesting. This guy, Devin Nash, who is some sort of like business analytic gamer advisor, and I think I've mentioned him before, and he's interviewed a bunch of chess players, but he understands the business and legal aspect. And he's got a YouTube channel, Twitch channel, and he's mentioning this big purge on Twitch, largely due to copyrighted music. And I guess on Twitch, most people play their stuff with copyrighted music in the background, but it used to be they didn't really crack down on them unless it was like a major copyright violation. But now it looks like they're going to crack down on any copyright violation, and they don't have an algorithm like YouTube, where YouTube, when you post a video and there's a problem, it automatically tells you. So people are getting banned, and people are deleting like their whole inventory of videos. And I'm not on Twitch. I'm not a gamer, but it's possible there's also purges. So this guy's got pretty good data, covers the law, mostly related to gaming. I've mentioned him before in the past, but I thought that might be an interesting phenomenon that he thinks Twitch might even go under.
Oh, wow. Well, I guess it wouldn't be unprecedented that some type of adaptation like that makes it impossible for business to operate, eh? I'm surprised they can't get the algorithm. I'm surprised they can't get an algorithm to identify copyrighted music, because you'd think that the copyright holders would make such an algorithm freely available.
Well, YouTube has it, but it might be complicated. It might be beyond their means to even have such a thing. That YouTube has some sort of algorithm that just by a few frames or a few beats that they could pick up a match and notify the owner of it. It's possible that's beyond the means of Twitch. And I mean, Twitch, I think, is already losing money, because most of these places are losing money. But the hemorrhaging of the money for Twitch might become too much. And it could be interesting for YouTube, because that will mean that a lot of these people a lot more gamers that are on Twitch will focus more on YouTube. But it's interesting, and if you're into kind of like the analytics behind like politics in terms of streaming. Gaming's way more popular than politics, which is more popular than science. So it's just interesting to follow those trends in gaming. Here is this show I've showed before, the late morning program from Namarasa podcast. So this man, Mahatsaha, usually in the Union Square in New York City, Harinam. However, since COVID-19, they've been traveling in the South, and he's been doing Trump rallies. So I guess there's pictures of him, like chanting Hare Krishna at Trump rallies, wearing MAGA hats. And some people were complaining like you can't wear MAGA hats, but he explains it and says how it was you're really just trying to blend in. They just wanted to be able to preach the Lord Krishna and Lord Chaitanya, and they needed some way to break the communication barrier and wearing the MAGA hats. I'm trying to have this guy on the left here, the Mahatsaha, on my channel, hopefully this week or next week. We've been in talks for a while, but he's a traveling preacher, I think, in like Atlanta right now. So hopefully that'll be interesting. It's possible that will even be this week. Not sure if you're
awesome. Well, we'll definitely look forward to that.
Okay, like we probably can't play this clip, but I just saw from Khabib Nurmagomedov, the big fight against Gaeth, and won the second round. I think JF even did the whatchamacallit live stream commentary on it. But he was interviewed afterwards, and he said he believed in the afterlife, and he said how his father, every time that he did sing, he's like, that'll be for the next life, that'll be for the next life. And he didn't directly mention reincarnation, but it sounded like the next life in his was some form of reincarnation. He didn't directly say that. So I thought that was interesting. I'm not sure if you saw the big fight or we're up on that.
I didn't see the fight, but I saw part of the video, and it seemed like he was talking about heaven and hell, not reincarnation at all.
Well, he said next life. So he says, Father, like this is for the next life. So that expression implies reincarnation. And maybe in Dagestan, there's a mix. Like he's Islamic, and reincarnation is not necessarily forbidden in Islam like it is in Christianity. And they might have some sort of like tribal belief in reincarnation that permeates their Islam, whereas Dad used an expression like "I'll see you in the next life," even though maybe theologically he's not supposed to believe in reincarnation, but for some reason he still used that expression.
Sorry to interrupt you, Doovid. I'm just concerned that you're sharing one of your private messages on your screen share right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's no problem. I just thought maybe you didn't realize, and would appreciate me letting you know. But please go ahead.
So Jared, so I thought that was interesting. It's not just a lot of times they say like there are big names in every generation who always espoused reincarnation, even though it's usually a minority belief. And so growing up or something, if it's like Madonna or Khabib, whether he didn't mention reincarnation directly, but it's not uncommon that you hear public figures make statements like that. So Jared Kushner was on the Ben Shapiro show. It wasn't really that interesting, I gotta say.
I haven't really watched too many of Shapiro's interviews. He just seems like inconsistent. Like he seems like he's been really harsh with some people, but he was sort of throwing him softballs. Is that what they call it? He was handling him with kid gloves. I think Kushner did well, but wasn't a very challenging interview.
Yeah, it wasn't like I didn't really learn anything. Like it just kind of repeated talking points, and yeah, I didn't like push them on any issue. So I mean, like I watched it in 2-speed, but like there's not too many interviews with Kushner, but you don't really, you're not gonna, there's no like news and no major thing in that. So here was a recent scientific paper I just read today related to chess studies, just came out today about life cycles of excellence. It was mentioning that people usually peak in performance between mentally between 35 and 45 for peak life mental performance. Here was an article Jennifer or someone sent, and it was about new AI computer programming is deciphering ancient languages, and so that's interesting. It's similar
Oh
to
yeah,
the
my uncle's gotten interested in this AI and machine learning. So I think Facebook algorithm maybe picked up on that and shared me that link that you just showed, and I sent it to you because I thought you'd find it interesting. Was I right, or was it one of those cringy? I wish you'd never sent me that links.
well, it wasn't like a scientific paper; it was just an article, and it didn't really provide much evidence, and so like I didn't gain that much from it. I skimmed through it; it's interesting, but that same method of truth discovery of using the computer to figure something out, to like a machine learning algorithm, like to decipher code. So the multiple truth hypothesis, from a mathematical algorithmic standpoint, will look at it somewhat in the way that what if you programmed a computer to figure out the truth? So all of these are kind of minor versions
Well, I'd
of
have to invoke the multiple truth hypothesis on you and say that all truths are axiomatically relative, and we'd have to tell the computer what the supreme truth of the universe was before it could isolate the exact solution to it.
no, I mean the truth discovery function of a computer program would give a numerical likelihood of the truth, like a Schrodinger's equation, where you would have the multiple truths, and then you would have a numerical estimate of the likelihood that that was, so to say, the one truth. And
Yeah, but estimates are always relative to something. How could you possibly know without something to calibrate it with?
well, so the machine learning functions have to calibrate themselves based off of corrections in the data. And I mean, I have a lot of research. I'm going to go into how these work, how these machine learning algorithms work, and then what would that apply to, so to say, the ultimate algorithm that would, so to say, just go about discovering the truth. But I am going to present. I'll even show it now. I think I showed last week the DeepMind webpage and all these scientific papers. So I'm going to do a public study session on that, and I'll do the last one. I guess Adam Green made, God forbid, anti-Semite of the week. On I'm not really sure who puts these together, like just some far right Jew or some donated money to fight anti-Semitism. How much I looked into it or no, but they were very happy that his YouTube page got taken down, and they're encouraging people to complain and try to get his webpage and all his other stuff taken down. And here, God forbid, it's even saying like Bowers, God forbid, from the Tree of Life shooting. It's saying like Adam Green said the same anti-immigration rhetoric. So, I don't agree with these assessments, but Andrew Gage a few weeks ago. But I thought that was noteworthy. I'd mention that.
Yeah, he was around longer than most, I guess, on the YouTube there. I don't know if I would say it was hateful, but it was definitely drilling down on the Noahide thing to the exclusion of other things. So I guess, I don't know. I didn't watch enough of his stuff to really know. But
If you said relatively, like you would say, okay, what does it mean as an anti-Semite? They're using hyperbole, is what they're saying truthful. But if you just said like, this dude makes Jews the most nervous. So you're saying of all the people out there, you're saying like Adam Green is, he's making the most Jews the most nervous, whether it's warranted or not.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when did Alex Jones get censored? Seemed like he was one of the first ones to go.
Well, we're not talking censorship necessarily, but I'm saying Alex Jones, I don't think was ever anti-Semite of the week. I mean, generally, conspiracy theories. He might say an occasional anti-Semitic thing, but like, no, I don't think Alex Jones was ever anti-Semite of the week. You know, he might be in the same genre of conspiracy theory, but like Alex Jones was only considered problematic to the Jewish community. I don't think most Jews were like threatened or scared that Alex Jones was on the radio and that like it was going to be disastrous for the Jewish people. But there's probably a lot of people out there that feel that way about Adam Green. You're just like, this, like you got to get rid of this guy, God forbid, or else if you keep on letting him yap, it's going to be bad for the Jews. And so it's not that, I mean, same like the censorship deal, like Alex Jones didn't get censored just because Jews were scared of him. He got censored for a whole bunch of reasons. And the Jews maybe weren't even one of them, as where Adam Green is almost exclusively getting censored, because of the Jews.
It was a while ago. I can't really remember what reason was given for Alex Jones being taken off of YouTube.
It was Sandy Hook. I mean, it was like the child actor, crisis actors, gun control stuff, or even the threatening stuff that made it seem like he was threatening gun violence or even murder to people. So I mean, it wasn't like jokes about it wasn't like anti-Semitic overtones. I think it was like directly like gun violence stuff that they claimed could lead to immediate death.
Oh.
And at that level, that's much more serious than like anti-Semitism relatively. Like in terms of speech removal, the threat of violence is much stronger than hate speech.
All right. Well, thanks for filling me in on that. Yeah, it's hard to say what's gonna happen. I mean, just feels there's an acceleration feeling, isn't there? That whatever's happening is happening at a faster speed as time goes on. So,
well, it could be that the COVID-19 is going to increasingly become more and more in a factor, and we mentioned it in some of the videos we did on my channel about COVID-19 could be a catalyst towards rapid digitalization. That here we're going to go into the winter. In all likelihood, there's going to be huge, unprecedented amount of cases. Could be hospitals overfilled. There could be supply chain disruptions, and turn to the computer to save us. Relatively, will probably be our biggest hope, and relatively productivity will probably increase, as opposed to people getting together in offices or meeting in person and having all the virtue signaling and social problems. Just people getting the job done through the computer. And what I've talked about in the past that I call computer intermediated human interaction will prove to be much better. And so that if in the U.S. we have a real COVID crisis over the winter and massive shutdown, supply chain disruption, that people will survive if they're capable of computer intermediated interaction. It means
yeah, you've spoken about this before in relation to yourself. Described it as interacting with a machine, I believe.
Yeah, so our relationship is completely computer intermediated. But when we talk about COVID-19 and we talk about the business world and work and running supply chains and keeping the economy going, in all likelihood, there's no question that computer intermediated interaction is extremely more efficient, and the computer could basically control the efficiency. So if just humans are getting together in office to work, the humans themselves will set the rate of efficiency for how much is dedicated to work or the task at hand, and generally that rate's going to be quite low. As where if the people are intermediating through the computer, they're saying, I'm not really here to socially interact with this person. I'm here to get this task done. And they'll let the computer pace the interaction just to make sure things get done. And that's already the direction of technology. It's already happening. And, mentioned in some of the slideshows or streams Jennifer did on the topic was that COVID-19 is likely to cause a rapid adaptation of these computer technologies.
Yeah, well, yeah. Do you mean adaptation or adoption? Because I
Yeah,
see a lot of people,
adoption.
I see a lot of people adopting more technology as a result of this. Like even just the COVID tracker, where you have an app that takes pictures of those two-dimensional barcodes, I guess they are called. Hey, Halsey's in the chat. What's going on, man? Nice to see ya. I'll send you the link on Twitter just in case you want to come on. No pressure, but we'd love to say hi.
But yeah, I was trying to book Chuck Moskowitz for Halsey also, if he's listening. It wasn't exactly. Yeah, me and Jennifer got our thing going, but now is the time for news right before elections. So Chuck Moskowitz going full in on Trump 2020 has upped his social value and his streaming. Although I like talking to
How are
authors.
his numbers doing?
His YouTube numbers don't seem that big. I don't know. He multicast. So I can't tell him. He's getting bigger names, but it's hard to tell what kind of numbers he has.
Well, because I remember he had lower numbers than I thought he deserved, but when you went on, it seemed like they were trending a bit higher.
I seem to be his most popular guest. Maybe occasionally he has even his bigger name guest, but it's possible that he gets more views and listens on other platforms. I'm not sure. Like he puts himself out there on multiple platforms and podcast also, and used to. I think he used to. I'm not sure if he ran his own radio show, if he was employed, or he rented his own time on local radio. But yeah, I think his things are going a little bit better. He published a book. I guess he publishes books all the time, but it's a good thing to. I mentioned Halsey to that guy Lowell. I'm not sure. I don't have what kind of contact because everyone's getting censored. So I contact Halsey through Twitter, and this guy Lowell through Facebook, and Charles Moskowitz. I'm actually just calling on the phone. And actually saved the problem. Like him, I just when he reached out to me, he gave me his cell number when he first reached out to on Twitter, and so I just the other day we were streaming. I just called his cell number. It was easier.
Cool. Yeah, I guess we got to find alternative ways to get in touch with people in the case of something happening with their accounts.
Yeah, I don't have contact to Roseanne. It's just the guy who does the show, and with her, and I'm not sure if I think he got banned from Twitter, so he's on Facebook, and I'm not sure how easy he is to work with. Halsey's a pretty easy dude to like a streaming professional. Lowell's probably old background in professional media, and so Halsey could probably be live tomorrow, show new guy, popping him on. Lowell's pretty together too, but Roseanne has someone else that does it for her, her kid or grandkid or paid assistant that has to set this up for her. So I'm not sure. I don't think I'm going to be able to be helpful for that, but you never know.
Well, we'll see. I've been watching Larry Sanders' show. We're up to the episodes where Roseanne shows up. And my husband thought it was really cool that he only had, 3 degrees of separation, or maybe even 2 degrees of separation with Roseanne, because you had been on a live stream with her.
Was this
My husband finds you quite hilarious, Doovid.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. Was this a new episode, or is it back? I don't even know following it.
Oh, Larry, what is his name? Gary Shandling, I think, the guy who played Larry Sanders, is passed away. So yeah, it's an older show. It's funny though. It's one of those classic comedies type things. It's still good even a long time after it's finished. So yeah. I'm not a very interesting person, am I? Alrighty. So yeah, what do we want to talk about next? It looks like Halsey can't come on the show, so that's too bad. Maybe some other time he can show up and tell us how things have been going in Halseyville. And yeah, there's a couple people who want to come on the show, but I kind of get the vibe that they're busy and a little shy to come on, because I think Doovid's a little bit of an intimidating character. Sometimes maybe I am too. Yeah. Has Nicholas Petrus got his audio equipment yet? Is he going to be able to show up on live stream and grace us with his presence? That would be fun.
Yeah, I saw on the chess server. It's like you got to be nice to noobs, and like you're a lot of times you're competing with people. It's heavy competition. It takes almost your full effort to be competitive. But and it's funny, this European server. I'm not sure. Have you heard the? I mean, it's pretty obvious, but are you the noob, NOOB? Halsey, you got timed out.
Yeah, well, he used. I didn't mean to time him out. I just had to, because I had no other way of erasing his comment. I didn't want to have the N word in the chat. It's nothing personal. I just couldn't figure out how to erase the message without timing him out. That's all.
One thing I figured out, like a lot of these kids, a lot of the people I'm playing chess with are like literally like little kids, like 8, 10, 15-year-old kids. But yeah, noob, pretty popular expression. So I've even been using that. You have to be nice to the noobs. And
it's really hard though. Like, take someone like Super Librix, right? Like, I literally had to block him on social media because he was just being like, I told him, stop tagging me in these idiot posts. I'm not triggered. I just don't give a shit about your dumb theory, because I
was saying at that point he's no longer a noob. I'm saying you were when he was a noob, you were nice to him. I was saying after like the 10th stream, he's no longer a noob, and you could like lay down some rules. So I didn't mean that. It's saying like streaming and like, okay, when it's competitive, you're on the battlefield. It's not necessarily a good time for a noob to come over and say hi. They might get hit, God forbid. Because and if the person's constantly on the battlefield, there's really no good time for a noob to come over and introduce themselves.
Well, it's sort of like the age-old teaching about embodying the spirit of the learner, and maybe that's a lesson that even I could learn, is like sort of honors people to approach them as a student sometimes.
Well, so if you're like in the temple, if you're in a positive setting, like there's family and children and food around and good music, you're saying the person's more approachable, or hopefully we'll have a time of peace, and you're saying that it'll be more inviting to the noobs, and saying there's not that much on the battlefield right now. Like
it's a tough situation, because to come in and to be espousing the values of the student would appear to most people as a loss of prestige, so they get defensive and they become sort of irreverent and disrespectful, and that
also the likelihood that this like the lockdown is going to last, and people are going to may not saying people may not seek out waves or look to this source of but the technology is changing, and even if our shows, our channels don't grow, you're just the understanding of how to use the technology and find people to talk about things that interest you or share commonality is going to be valuable. And then just learning how to stream, learning how to present a personality, an e-personality, like the Luke Ford school of e-personality. This new, it could be a new era where more and more people are just gonna be like, like I've been in lockdown for a year now. Like I'm just gonna go on Week in Review and create an e-personality. Like I'm tired of being in isolation, and the likelihood that this is going to carry on might change that. Just force people to gather the courage, largely just to survive. Like the power of loneliness will set on people that they'll be more willing to try something new.
Well, it would be nice. It's just that people need to be, brave enough to and comfortable with the idea that they're wrong about most of their understanding of things. And it's like you can either double down on the wrongness or you can be right. But once you start being right, you're starting at square one. I mean, you're still ahead of most people, but you have to be in the learner, good student vibe. And most people have too brittle and too fat of an ego to do that. They want to
Even
come in and
reality is
assert.
forcing.
They want to
You know,
assert that they have the capacity for independent thinking. I think that's what the illusion is that people are attached to. Like everybody wants to have their little pet theory and protect it with their lives and think that they are able to have an original thought, but that's actually like pretty much borderline, heretical belief with regards to natural religion. Not really any such thing as new ideas, there's just new discoveries. So, I think people really just need to have a spiritual shift where they shift into the learner uh, vibe versus the know-it-all vibe, which is sort of what most people are. The level most people are at. They're sort of just talking past each other with these memorized facts that thinks that equates to knowledge, and that knowledge equates to social status.
yeah, I mean, the realization that ignorance is factually just a natural condition. There's nothing you can do about.
The default position, right? Like we could even prove that with quantum mechanics. We could say like, well, we have to suffer because if we didn't suffer to this extent, we dying, if dying felt like an orgasm, then we'd all be dead, right? So it's got to feel bad, or else you're not going to be able to diagnose threats to your survival in the environment. So suffering is the cornerstone of sentience.
Yeah, and relates to how people process information and make decisions.
Yeah, I guess on some level, people aren't ready to abandon their existential illusions.
But just on the practical level of forced change due to suffering, that suffering doesn't necessarily cause a forced change, but adaptation and adoption of things like lifelong education, where it's been known for decades now that you need to constantly be retraining yourself. You can't just have training in your early adult life and then be set for the rest of your life. You need constant retraining, and you're just that mindset of knowing that you're constantly going to have to be correcting yourself because the state of knowledge is changing, and what was believed to have been true might change every few years, at least to be successful in the material realm. That will cause at least a certain element of the population to become like that, because that's what it takes to be successful. And certainly that is the direction where these stubborn, unhumble mindsets are less and less conducive to success.
Yeah, so Jackie Z says she likes to learn. Sometimes it's hard, takes time to let the pride down. It's something we should all work on. Yeah, I totally agree with you, and thanks for saying that. Like I think a lot of my interactions with other people would have gone a lot smoother if I had espoused this value more. And it's hard for me because I'm definitely a proud person, but I am not against the idea of adapting myself in the interest of a superior result, and nor should anyone else be, because at the end of the day, I get it. Nobody wants to look dumb. I totally get that. Uh, I will, vow that I will do my best not to make anybody look dumb. Because frankly, I don't think it really needs to go to that extent. Sometimes when people get out of hand and are extremely rude, sometimes you got to set the tone, right? But I really do want to help people learn wherever they're at with whatever questions they have. But if you're, it sort of reminds me of this fable of the student going to see the master, and saying, well, can you tell me some knowledge, master? And master says, I can't, because your cup is full and you have to empty the cup, i.e. get rid of your extant presuppositions, which may or may not be correct, in order to be filled with this foundational wisdom, because it really does, if it's going to work, it's got to uproot your false beliefs. And we, through time and inertia, become attached to our false beliefs. It is simply a matter of inertia. We are a product of the forces of nature. And so these forces, i.e. inertia, which is the tendency to remain the same, applies to all of us. But it's really not that big of a deal, because you got to realize that almost nobody has any answers in this domain. Some people might think they do, but if you actually demand that they meet a scientific standard with their claims, you will find most people fall very far short. And everybody, especially the people we think of as smart, are insecure about being perceived as stupid. So just acknowledge that this is something that sort of holds us back. It's a vestigial impulse, this fear of standing out, this tall poppy syndrome, and just realize it for what it is. It's about as useful as that. The appendix, is that what it's called? It's vestigial. It's not going to serve you in the path of higher spiritual realizations. Certain things simply have to be let go of in order to embrace foundational wisdom that can actually help manage the suffering of day-to-day life. And Doooovid and I both understand what this is like. We still suffer, even though we've come a long way in our spiritual learning. We still have setbacks, and we were where you're at some point. And so we have a great deal of compassion for it, even though maybe it seems like at times we're not as patient as we should be, but we're always working to serve you better, because that's ultimately what underscores everything, is a genuine desire to serve the civilization.
Amen. So we just want to wrap up short and sweet this week, and or do you have anything else you want to?
No, I got a chance to go over my articles. I hope anybody who's interested gets a chance to read them, especially if you have trouble sleeping. Psychology 5 on my blog will give you a couple tricks to help you sleep. If you're interested in lucid dreaming, that's another thing. But again, techniques like lucid dreaming, you got to approach them with caution, because you're dealing with more fundamental / subtle levels of the mind. So go in with trepidation. Nevertheless, it is not that risky to attempt to lucid dream. So I did put some guidelines on the blog, and if you understand them and internalize them, they will work. I can tell you this from personal experience, having been an avid lucid dreamer for many years now. So yeah, I really do appreciate that, and look forward to the continued conversation on consciousness. Hopefully, we really just need to get people to accept the tri-state model, right? So you got to ask yourself, is there a better way to describe what my consciousness is compelling me to do? Can you find a better fundamental hypothesis of consciousness than I am? Can you think of anything in your consciousness that doesn't fall under the umbrella of I am? And you've got to ask yourself and convince yourself that that's the right answer, because that's what I did. It took me years to find these answers and really work it out in a way that I knew wouldn't be able to be demonstrated false. So yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. I don't know if you have any last words, Doooovid, but I'm cool to wrap it up now, and really look forward to next week. And thanks to everybody in the audience for tuning in and participating in the chat.
Good, thanks a lot. Glad we were able to do it. Have some scheduling problems, but obviously, Church of Entry are pushing on and furthering research and doing what we do. So it's good to touch base, and hopefully we'll be able to create an environment that's inviting for noobs to enter the streamosphere and enter research and share their ideas. So join us next week and have a great week.
I think
everyone.
you just got challenged to a chess game by Mark Smith, so I don't know if Mark Smith has the stones to actually put his money where his mouth
Well,
is.
you got to reach out. I'm Doooovid on the chess servers too, so you could reach out to me there.
Well, that'll be a match worth tuning into. Thank you so much for participating in the stream, Doooovid, and audience. thank you very much for all the contributions, and we will talk to you soon. So Party Bots wants to know what the synopsis of the channel is. It is a way for me to talk to people about various subjects. So this show is skewed towards Doovid's interests, but the reason we did this show is because Doovid and I have a shared interest. And I think the way he describes it is we agree where most people disagree, and we disagree where most people agree. So unlike a lot of people who don't really think about these things, Doovid and I have spent a lot of time sort of going over these various axioms and ideas and theories, and we have opinions about them. And it just sort of happens that it's an interesting interplay because of this unusual superposition of us agreeing on things that most people either don't agree with or don't have an opinion on, and then disagreeing on things that you could argue are maybe more subtle distinctions, i.e., interpretations of faith or metaphysical questions. So, yeah. Personally, the only reason I have this channel is because I think videos are a good way to convey information. I'm not much of a monologuer. I do enjoy teaching, but if I don't have a specific audience, I'm not just going to, invent an audience that doesn't exist. But if someone asks me a question, more than likely I will write an article to answer it. Excuse me. So people could check that out on my blog. And I suggest reading the blog before you come and bring questions, because if you are just going to come and tell me your theory about whatever, I'm probably going to quickly get frustrated, because it's like, why should I care about your theory? That's the number one thing. Like, that's how I've been approaching everything I've ever studied, is why should I care? And a lot of people haven't really thought about framing their ideas in that sense, like doing a what you would call persuasive making a persuasive tack with their ideas. Most people aren't on that level because their ideas are just so shit that there's no way to persuade people to believe them in any legitimate manner, right? So it sort of degenerates into, I don't want to say name calling, but it degrades into what you might call sophistry, where it's, these long threads of burden of proof shifting. The best example is the R-vol versus JF debate. Now, that had some interesting points, but ultimately it came across as a game of shifting the burden of proof. And it's actually quite a non-trivial matter to determine who has the burden of proof. But before you can ask a question like that, you have to answer, what is the orthodox interpretation? Because burden of proof always has to do with who's deviating from orthodoxy. But if you have no orthodox interpretation, then it is very difficult to establish who has the burden of proof. And that's why it was seemingly a legitimate argumentation tactic for them to both basically try to shift the burden of proof back and forth to each other, because I suppose it's easier to shift the burden of proof than to just take on the burden of proof and accept that ultimately axioms are unfalsifiable. That's very important. You cannot prove an axiom. So evident at some point you will have to say, trust me, right? So that's why when you're going through your thought process, if you want to understand what your values are and what your thought hierarchy is, you have to have a foundational axiom, which we have always taken to be causality, because that is unfalsifiable in a good way. It's impossible to prove causality false because we live in a causal universe. And then on top of that, we have to start interpreting causality in a manner that gives us information that we want. And that's very difficult because you don't know the nature of the information coming out of your system, and you don't know what the best way to get that information is. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg where you don't know anything about the chicken or the egg. That's why you have to turn back to traditional interpretations and say, well, look at what all these other great people thought in history, and try to understand why they thought them. And then through your own volition and thought process, sort of decide which one of those makes the most sense to you, because there are different schools. and there are different prioritizing of demonstrations of proof. And we're in a, I suppose you could call it a metaphysical vacuum, because we don't have any way to assert a positive. And in order to demonstrate, make them proof demonstrations, you need some means to assert a positive. And the idea with different schools is that what can be asserted as a positive depends on what axioms your school accepts. So if your school only accepts, for example, testimony, well, your arguments have to take that form, i.e., they have to be coming from a person who is already accepted as a master of giving testimony. Well, then it's, how do we determine that? And it's sort of regressive to the, and it will be infinite regression unless you can just commit to a school and say, yep, I'm good with just this axiom, or I'm good with just the causal axiom. So if we were doing science correctly in the West, we would just have the causal axiom and some type of rudimentary geometry, which is what I've attempted to furnish with the quantum mind hypothesis. But you need to be able to assert that positive. So the positive that I'm asserting is the sphere. Why? Because it's really, really hard to argue against a sphere. So, I mean, it's been done. I've heard all manner of moronic arguments. Like I've heard, if the goal is to minimize suffering, why don't you just kill yourself? It's like, grow up type deal. But ultimately, we all have to answer these questions for ourselves. And I suggest looking at history and looking at which school got the results, because it's pretty clear that in history, there's really only been one school that dominated. If you care about dominating in debate, there's really only one way to do it, because the other schools are all, in some sense, a subset of this school, which can win debates against all the other schools. And that's, in short, what I'm trying to present people with. So I wouldn't judge the channel just based on week in review, but I will just make content if people want to come on. And, it's hard to come on and talk about things because people don't want to take the attitude of the learner. But, I promise I'll be gentle. And what I know is valuable, in the sense that it can make predictions and it can give you a greater insight into how things that are normally really hard to understand can just make them a little bit easier to understand. And that's the goal. So what I'm hoping people will do is read the articles on the blog and come with specific questions, because there's no such thing as a dumb question, honestly. Like they're all great questions. I won't judge. I've heard them all. Honestly, all right, so someone said Claire is in the chat. If she is, mods ban her. I can't see her, so please ban Claire Caw immediately in the chat. Yeah, that's over. So, yeah, the Mark Smith saying rudimentary geometry is basic truth. Yeah, like everything is essentially starting. If you give me a sphere, from that sphere, I can deform it into any other shape. Now, is that true? Well, you know what I mean? It's sort of like, what is truth, right? We need to get basic definitions that are not weak to this regressive problem, right? Like, for example, defining consciousness. We can't find the answers to consciousness if we don't define what it is that we're looking for. But how can we define what we're looking for if we don't know what it is? So these are always extremely difficult questions. That's why we need to invoke what the historical traditions teach us as some sort of a guidepost. Otherwise, we're just stuck in this, well, I don't know what question to ask and I don't know what the answer is, infinite regression into unknowingness. Like I've heard a lot of bozo definitions of consciousness, like, well, it's awareness. Okay, well, what's awareness? Right? It's like, well, it's consciousness. It's like, well, that's a circular definition. Okay, well, and then we realize through going back the infinite regression meme that everything is a circular definition. All truths are circular. All logic is circular within its axioms. So that's realize you have to really realize that for yourself, that all statements of truth are axiomatically relative. And that's not to be interpreted as meaning that we can't know anything, which is what a lot of Yahoo dumbasses want to say, where it's like, you're too arrogant, Jen. Slash, well, I know nothing, therefore I am the smartest person in the world. It's like, no, you're not. Acknowledging that subjective consciousness is difficult to transcend doesn't mean you've transcended it. It means you've acknowledged that it's a difficult problem. You have to actually do work to get to answers that will transcend consciousness. Yeah, so Party Boss wants to know what school I was alluding to earlier, so I can pull that up and I'll give people a quick intro if they want to see what the established school is. I am technically starting a new school, so if you go with me, you'll be in a new school, but you'll also be with the only school giving results for quite some time. So there's that. But if you look at the historical schools, you really see like just how different they are from the Western interpretation. And I do think this was done intentionally. But you have your primary one, which is perception. So doesn't that seem very strange to be taking perception as a valid form of proof? Well, yes and no. From a Western scientific perspective, you think, you hear the weak-willed, limp-wristed dipshit saying things like, well, that's not scientific. It's like, well, what are we more sure exists, our own consciousness or the objects that our consciousness observes? Because, that's all of our scientific data is things that we subjectively interpret the context of. So perception is more accurate if it's done by someone who is a master. It's not, you can't just take any Yahoo's perceptions as reality. The idea is that if someone has established themselves as giving good answers, then you could trust those answers. And that's your standard perception. Then you have inference, which we already know a little bit about. This is a logical technique. Same with comparison, postulation, derivation from circumstances, so when you get to the stuff like non-perception, that's along the lines of what you call logical contraposition. So that's something you can look at. It's a bit of a tough one to get your mind across, but if you look at it in a Venn diagram, it's a lot more self-evident. But basically, it's various ways of doing logical analysis. But because Western schools don't really accept perception as authoritative, it's hard to sort of mesh them together. That's why you have to take a different tack where you can actually prove your assertions within the domain of Western science, which luckily my theory can do. So I'll see if I find an image that is representing what I'm looking for, and if not, I'll just update my search here. So yeah, ultimately this channel is about people who want to learn about some stuff to do with science, consciousness, religion, take your pick. I'm not seeing this a very good diagram here. Here we go. So this diagram that we can see here with the A and the B, I'll try to make it a little bigger. So what does this diagram mean from a set theoretic perspective? It means that A implies B. Okay, so A being a subset of B means that if you are a member of the A group, then you're by default a member of the B group because A is a subset of B. And Boolean logic, we would write A implies B. And there's another logical equation, which is not B implies not A. So it's just saying that if I'm outside of this circle defined as B, then I am also outside of the circle defined as A. And this is called contraposition. So ideas like this are, you'd be on your way to sort of starting to understand how the traditional schools work, but it is really hard to mix them to find some link between the ancient knowledge and the present, because all the ancient knowledge is subjectively oriented, whereas modern knowledge is all objectively oriented, like what's going on outside of us that we can be absolutely sure of. That's why we were able to discover stuff like the periodic table, because we're just so darn focused on the external environment because we didn't accept anything subjective as authoritative. So Party Boss wants to know if my blog is the overall summary of all these subjects, or do I present philosophy theory in one canonical format? It's a good question. The blog is more or less explanations of ideas that I believe that their time has come or that people have asked me about. So the direction that the blog takes, if you go back to the earlier writings, you'll see that it sort of changed over the years because the questions I'm getting are changing, and I'm focusing in more on something that's scientifically valid and cogent and really hard to deny, right? Like I want it to be super easy to force my opponents into taking an absurd position if they disagree with me. So for example, if you disagree with reincarnation, that's the same thing as saying that you believe that consciousness has no energy in it, because consciousness, if it has energy, energy is subject to conservation of energy, which implies a form of reincarnation consistent with that. So that basically learn through practice that that's the fastest way to basically corner opposition, which is important part of rhetoric. So that's the Church of Entropy blog. The School of Entropy, if you're looking for the canonical format, that's School of Entropy. So on that, I've tried to, the goal with that is that it will eventually be a sort of syllabus for university type learning plan. So that's the goal. But yeah, I'm always open to answering questions, especially about the stuff on the blog. And even if it's not on the blog, I'll be able to, if not answer your question, then at least give you a reason why I can't answer your question. So Party Boss, if you wiki Pramana to get caught up, but that'd be a good place to start, because you'll understand that historically there have been different schools that were distinguished by which Pramanas they accepted, and that my quote unquote school, if it gets accepted as such, has its own Pramanas as well. But I've tried to make them consistent with the Western canon as well, because obviously I have to work with what I have, and I understand that there's probably a huge leap in axioms and beliefs for a lot of people, but I'm trying to make the gap between true knowledge and extant knowledge as small as possible. And this is more or less how I've worked it out. So it ends up being a more rigorous form of science that has a means of making positive assertions, because that's really what's missing. And if you want to learn more about this, check out Arval's channel. He talks about, if you have, and he's talking about a metaphysical hypothesis. So he's sort of getting back to where I'm going via the Platonic route. And you can think of Plato as sort of using like a very degenerated form of archetypes, but still usable. It's not the best archetypes, but it sort of got the job done, right? But he talks about how you have to have a metaphysical construct. You can't just have no metaphysics. And depending on the definition of metaphysics that we use, I am inclined to agree, because I guess you could argue I have a type of spherical metaphysics. There's no way to observe a perfect sphere, but the perfect sphere does inform our computations and our strategic approach to problem solving. And so I agree with Arval in that sense, but we got to pick the right archetypes if we're going to have metaphysical constructs, because then you're going past physics. You're asking people to believe in things that they can't directly or indirectly observe. And so you better have a good effing reason to invoke these archetypes, which is why I'm saying, let's just go with the sphere. Who's going to argue against the sphere? I mean, it seems like a losing proposition. But yeah, Party Bots, great questions. And I hope you enjoy what I've written. My latest article on the blog is about quantum psychology, and it's the 5th one in a series, and it talks specifically about denial and dreaming. So I'm really interested in those subjects. I hope you are too, and I hope you will enjoy what I've written. Always open to questions / corrections. Obviously, if I was wrong, someone would have proven it by now, but I'm always open to being disproven if one of my suppositions or conclusions is incorrect. So I will not get triggered. I will appreciate it greatly if you bring me a well-constructed argument against one of my positions. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great evening. See you again on Sunday, if not sooner.
Yeah, that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of.
It's so important that she can't be told, she won't be told that it's wrong. And
bringing it back to Church of Entropy and her attack dog Gandalf the White.
Why don't you learn to shut up and fuck goddamn logic?
they control the media, and the media is capable of making the sheeple believe in anything.
Yeah, I don't mind. I mean, we've had these streams, and I've been doing with Church of Entropy, and she's been bringing on new people, and like we did those streams on like stream etiquette. We walked through like the technology.
I have like very strongly negative opinions of the kind of Brundle clique.
Is she trying to garner herself cult prestige by associating herself with a retard?